Yeah, Devin and I will be presenting about the stormwater project. So our presentation is titled Storm Drain to Stream, taking a closer look at local stormwater. So we'll start with a quick background introduction about the two of us. So as we were mentioning during the introductions to the meeting, my name is Miranda Vartanen and I'm the Executive Director for the Junction Creek Stewardship Committee. So my background is with herpetology. So stormwater isn't my expertise, but it's been great getting to know more about stormwater and the impacts to local waterways through this project. And Devin, I'll let you introduce yourself.
All right. Hello, everybody. As I mentioned earlier, my name is Devin Kenneth-Nadeau. I'm the project coordinator currently at Junction Creek, and I didn't know much about stormwater either, but it's certainly been a learning experience over the past year since we started the project, and eager to continue working on it over the next few months.
Great. So the Junction Creek Stewardship Committee, as everyone's probably well aware, we're a nonprofit organization, a small grassroots that formed in 1999 and became incorporated in 2008 and gained charitable status in 2019. So we are a small crew of 1 to 2 full-time staff members and up to 5 seasonal staff, and a lovely group of volunteer board of directors, which is usually up to 11. So we have that those resources and guidance and expertise from our board. So a quick overview of the 4 pillars of the Junction Creek Stewardship Committee, just to have a refresher and to orient as far as how the stormwater project aligns with our work. So we focus on 4 areas: research, restoration, education, and connecting. So gaining a better understanding about the health of the Junction Creek watershed and monitoring that water quality by looking at various factors such as the water chemistry and fish and benthic macroinvertebrates and species at risk, and biodiversity in general too. And restoration, so we're using that information to focus restoration activities to recover and protect the watershed, focusing on the riparian habitat and stream corridor. And then education, sharing that information that we're gaining with the public and talking with stakeholders too, and making resources accessible so that we can all learn and do better. And then the final one, connecting the community with Junction Creek, that kind of brings everything together. It's not just our group itself that's doing this work, it's the community. So we're all making that effort to revive the watershed and take care of the land and water. So the Junction Creek watershed is the central watershed of Greater Sudbury. It's within the traditional lands of Atikameksheng, Anishinaabeg, and Wampanoag First Nation. The creek itself is 52 kilometers in length and stretches between Garson through the downtown and Lively, and it drains into the Vermilion River, which drains to the Spanish River and Lake Huron. So the impacts of the watershed and any pollutants or contaminants that occur here will not only affect our communities locally, but everything downstream as well in the Lake Huron Basin. So I think that's a really important fact and something to take into consideration as we do the work that we do, that we realize that we're having an impact geographically and also on the generations, the future generations. And here is a map that kind of shows that route of Junction Creek and its connections. And you can imagine the various communities that are connected to that waterway as it makes its way to the North Channel. So what is stormwater? Stormwater is the water that goes on the surface, so from precipitation, rain, and snowmelt. this is an important part of the water cycle. So this is why we have that diagram here. It's that water that collects on the ground. So stormwater can either absorb into the ground and be used by plants, or it can travel as runoff on the surface and then discharge into local waterways or collect in various areas. So stormwater runoff, I've got an image here that shows the natural ground, what happens to stormwater, as well as impervious surface. And that means a surface that doesn't allow for the water to absorb into it. So in the natural environment where there's vegetation and trees, it will filter into the ground and seep into it. And also there'll be minimal runoff. That's like the main message here is with the harder surfaces, there's a lot more runoff for stormwater. And so in cities with the pavement, roads, parking lots, and also building surfaces, you can imagine that there's not as much water that's being absorbed into the ground. So from these hard surfaces, what is happening is that this extra stormwater runoff has to go somewhere. If it's not absorbing into the ground, it's going to accumulate. And this a lot of times causes flooding. And we've seen that a lot, and we still do see it nowadays in cities, and especially in Sudbury. But when Sudbury didn't have the trees and the paved surfaces were increasing, we saw a lot of flooding going on without that natural infrastructure to absorb that water and use it. So how is stormwater managed to prevent flooding in cities? So stormwater drains into a pipe system that's under the ground. And we wanted to include this image to show that there is a difference between the storm drain from the stormwater and the sanitary sewer that you would have like from your house, from your sinks and your toilets. So it's a different system. But they're usually both called like sewer lines. And for the storm drains, the water will drain into what's called a catch basin. So there's an image that shows the grate at the top right, and that's a common storm drain or catch basin. And what happens when the water goes in there is it goes into this pit, so to speak, which allows any heavy sediment to settle at the bottom. And then there's pipes that are a bit further up so that the water can flow. There's inlet pipes and outlet pipes. And so then these catch basins are opened up and cleaned out to remove those heavy materials. But as you can imagine, the lighter materials could flow through those pipes. And when it's suspended and the water's flowing through a rain event, heavier material like sand and sediment can also go through these pipes. So where does this water go when it's in these pipes? Is it going anywhere in particular? A lot of people think that it goes to a treatment facility, but most of the stormwater actually drains directly into local waterways. So it's going into streams, it's going into rivers and lakes, it's going into Junction Creek. So that was a really eye-opening experience, learning that the stormwater isn't filtered or treated by any means. I thought that there would be some sort of filtration system, and that's a common misconception. There are some systems in place, like oil grit separators in certain areas, or like large parking lots that help to remove some of that oil and sediment. But for the most part, it's going directly into local waterways. And as I was mentioning, those catch basins are made in a way to help to collect the heavier sediment. So this image shows some of the stormwater pollutants that are collected. So as the stormwater is flowing over these hard surfaces, your driveway, parking lots, roads, it's collecting various garbage and litter, bacteria and pollutants that are on these hard surfaces as well. So it's bringing these pollutants with it into the stormwater system and into our local waterways. So that is why we started the stormwater project to help to mitigate some of these stormwater pollutants and to take a closer look to see exactly what was going on in our local waterways and our stormwater. So I'm going to pass it on to Devin, and he's going to talk about the stormwater project. And let me know when you need me to change the slides, Devin.
Sounds good. All right, so as Miranda kind of alluded to, and as it says here on the slide, in 2022, last year, fall 2022 specifically, we started a multi-year community action-based project to raise awareness in the community and prevent certain stormwater contaminants from flowing into streams and lakes in the Junction Creek watershed. Next. So one of the things we did was reach out to local schools, libraries, and other properties throughout the city to inform them of our project and to get permission to install filters in their catch basins. The filters capture and divert stormwater pollutants such as litter, keep them from entering local waterways, and it also provides an opportunity to take a closer look at the variety of garbage and other pollutants that are entering the storm drains. These traps, especially this kind here, this mesh trap that's in the poster, they do have an overflow gap. So even if they get clogged, start filling up with water, water can still flow out through the trap and into the catch basin as designed, rather than backflowing out of the catch basin and like flooding into the streets. But we've been trying to stay on top of them anyway to avoid them, keep them from filling up. So in 2022, we installed filters in 8 catch basins as part of a pilot study at 4 properties in the south end of the city. And those properties were Llewellyn Park Secondary School, R.L. Beatty Public School, the South End Public Library, and Starbucks, actually, Plaza 69. And then this year we expanded the project and we reached 26 more catch basins across the city. So in total, we've covered 34 catch basins, and we've got some in Garson, New Sudbury, downtown, and Bell Park. There's also an educational component to the project in addition to the traps themselves. So we're engaging the community and raising awareness through outreach materials, presentations, discussions with the stakeholders, the property managers, and also community stewardship activities. I'll discuss that a bit more later, though. Next slide. So after we reached out to the landowners and got their permission to proceed with the project, the next step was to do site visits. So we located basins using Google Maps and site visits, taking GPS coordinates and whatnot, so we could map it out nicely later. And after we located those basins, the next step was to take measurements, basically. So there were some very specific measurements that we had to take, which you can see in the bottom left image on the slide there from Enviropod. There are many different dimensions we had to measure, so it took us a while to get through all of them, but we managed to do it. And once we were done taking the measurements at the basins, we submitted those measurements along with photos of each catch basin to a manufacturer known as Enviropod, who makes one of the types of traps that we're using. And that was to select the best kind of insert, the best model to use in each catch basin, because sometimes they're different shapes, sizes, round versus square, whatnot. And then after confirming an order with Enviropod and receiving a shipment, we were then able to actually install the appropriate type of filter. Next slide. So we've been using two main types of inserts. The first type is the Enviropod Lititrap. So it's a plastic mesh filter. The mesh is coarse enough or wide enough that it lets sand fall through, so it doesn't get as clogged with things. So it lets us target the garbage we're interested rather than filling up with sand. And there are different models for different basin shapes. So as you can see in the image, kind of in the middle, there's a rounded shape at the very center of the slide, and then there's a square-shaped trap in the bottom left. So there's a slight difference in cost between the different models, but generally they're similar cost, comparable. But the big learning curve with the Lititraps is that it requires some very specific parts and tools for installing them. So it does take a while, especially the first few ones that we did when we had a bit of online training provided by Enviropod, but a presentation online from them is yeah, that prepared us a little bit for the actual installation process, but it was a real learning curve when we actually got out there and did the first installations. But the benefit of these litter traps is that they're a fairly sturdy design. They have a warranty of 8 years, so they're meant for long-term use. Next slide. So the second type of trap that we've been using is called the Eagle Storm Nest. So it's a PVC coated fabric with an adjustable metal frame, and it's good for trapping road sand. Now that can kind of be a bit of a problem because it fills up faster than the litter traps. But if sand, specifically road sand, like from winter sanding in parking lots and along streets, if that's what you're interested in, then these fabric traps are pretty good. It also comes with an attached oil absorbing pouch built in. There are things you can do for the litter traps previously. They have various inserts or attachments that can filter different kinds of things like oils, but in this case, the only oil absorption we went with was with these fabric eagle traps. But these traps have the advantage of being really easy to install and remove. No special tools are required. Instead of being installed into the concrete of the catch basin, they just kind of sit on the lip right underneath the grate, and then the grate keeps them firmly in place. But they're really easy to, stretch, adjust to whatever square shape you need, as opposed to the litter traps. But they're meant more for single use or short-term use, more like specific construction projects, just a month or two, a few months maybe, depending on wear and tear. So they're not meant for long-term use, unlike the lidded traps. And another point about these eagle inserts is that they were used wherever we couldn't install litter traps. So there were some basins that were either way too shallow or narrow, or there were obstructions like pipes, inlet and outlet pipes, in the basin that would block access to the litter traps. So we had to use these fabric traps wherever we couldn't use litter traps. So we've got about 3 of these fabric traps installed. Next slide. So the other part, the second part of the project, as I mentioned earlier, it involves communication, basically, public outreach and education. So what this slide shows is one aspect of that public outreach. We were doing it with some high school students at Llewellyn. And essentially, we would give them a little presentation, introduce them to the concept of catch basins and stormwater and how things are mostly just discharging right into the nearest water body instead of being treated at a plant somewhere. So it was nice, especially at Llewellyn, because we had some traps right there, so we could show the students these traps in action right there on location. And next slide. And after showing them and introducing the topic of litter traps and storm drains, we've been doing some tallies throughout the year occasionally with various groups of students, different classes, different grades. And so with appropriate PPE, like gloves and maybe masks or safety glasses when necessary, and also having things like sharps kits, broken glass containers, just in case, what we do is conduct litter tallies with the students. So we collect the inserts, either the whole inserts or their contents at least ahead of time, and then we bring them to the students and we conduct litter tallies. So for example, the image on the left is depicting students emptying the contents of one of those fabric eagle inserts. And in that case, you can see on the table, it's mostly sand, maybe some gravel, rocks, leaves, but largely sand and maybe a little bit of garbage mixed in somewhere, depending on the site it came from. Then on the right is more the meat or the target that we're interested in. It's the litter, the garbage, plastic, cigarette butts and whatnot. So in addition to weighing the mass of the contents in the trap, we'd also do litter tallies, separate out the litter into various categories like soft plastic, hard plastic, cigarette butts, uh, other things like rubber, chewing gum, miscellaneous other garbage. And then we'd get the students to tally that so they can see not just it's not just theory, it's not just we have these traps and they'll catch something, but they can actually see the type of debris that flows into these storm drains, get a better appreciation for that. Next slide. So here are some results from our trial period last year, back in the fall. So we had 8 catch basins, 8 inserts in total in the south end during our trial period from September to November last year. And in total, we caught almost 32 kilograms of litter, soil, sand, rocks, and organic material like leaves and sticks. But the caveat is that the majority of that 32 kilograms was mostly soil and organic material, not that much actual litter. And largely that sand and gravel came from 2 of the fabric eagle traps that were in a school playground. They were receiving not literally tons, but the majority of the sand and gravel that we caught. So a couple of those inserts were really heavy and really full. So there's very little actual litter or garbage based on the mass. Uh, and the count wasn't too high either for the short trial, but it was a good trial period, good demonstration, things to expect. Things gave us info to improve the project this year. So there were various plastics collected, even though it was a small amount. Plastic food wrappers, soft plastic, hard plastic, cigarette butts. Cigarette butts were actually the number one, the single most common type of garbage we collected. Not necessarily on the schools, not at the public schools per se, but in total, mostly cigarette butts. And then also more innocuous things like paper and cardboard. And for the cigarette butts, this is true on a global scale as well. If you think about it, when someone is done smoking, if they're outside, they just toss the butt on the ground, right? So globally, cigarette butts are the most, or at least one of the most commonly littered items. Okay, next slide. And then here are, hang on, Rochelle. I think most people don't think about cigarette butts as garbage. Yeah. Okay. So here are some updated results from this year. So from April to October this year, this data is from 10 inserts. And the reason why it's only from 10 inserts, even though I said we had 34 installed total, is because the inserts we had at the south end, we took them out in November last year, um, both as a precaution and at the request of some of the properties. They wanted the inserts out of their basins for the winter. They didn't want to risk things filling up and flooding. And we didn't get a chance to reinstall the inserts until April of this year. And that was just the 8 in the south end. And then the new litter traps that we did this year, we didn't actually get around to installing those until June, July, or August. So since some of them have been in for only a very short time, they weren't that full yet. So that's why we don't have data from 34 inserts. This is only data from 10 inserts. But anyway, what we did collect is about 55 kilograms of litter, soil, and organics. And again, most of that mass is the soil, sand, leaves, especially now that it's fall, a lot of leaves. And then only about 1.1 kilograms of that is actual litter or garbage. So again, by mass, a fairly small amount of garbage. But the garbage that we did collect, again, dominated by cigarettes, 37% of the total litter composition this year, just this year, it's not counting last year's data. Just this year, 37% of the garbage is cigarette butts. And that's 37% of 1,441 pieces of garbage. Another big chunk of that garbage is made up of various kinds of plastics, Then we have a little bit of things like polystyrene, some metal fragments, rusty bits of metal, or some case coins. Find a bit of money in there. Uh, Handful of pieces of glass and rubber, fabric, chewing gum, and 13% of our litter catch this year is processed wood. So processed wood would be split up into paper, cardboard, and actual like treated wood, pressure treated wood, or mulch that's been like stained red, so not natural wood pine mulch, but something that's been treated. Um, but anyway, cigarettes still the single most common item. And then on the right pie chart, we further break down the plastics into what we actually caught. So as you saw from the trial period last year, we caught things like food wrappers, soft plastic, which would be bits of plastic shopping bags or Ziploc bags, hard plastic from various kinds of toys or other things, whatever else is harder, cigarette butts, polystyrene. Polystyrene is a type of plastic, and it actually kind of skipped over it, but cigarettes actually count as a kind of plastic. They're made out of mostly a bioplastic called cellulose acetate. Uh, so even though it is a bio or plant-based plastic, it is a plastic nonetheless. So we counted it as plastic litter. And then other things, other kinds of plastic, that little 1% of the plastic would be made up of things like plastic bottle caps, juice box straws, and straw wrappers. There's one other point I wanted to make about that. With regards to the plastic, the second most common plastic litter that we found was soft plastic. So as I mentioned, pieces of Ziploc bags or grocery bags, produce bags. We did find one almost complete little like sandwich Ziploc in there, but for the most part, it's just little bits and pieces that keep breaking up. All right. Next slide. So returning to the community outreach, education, and activities part of the project, here are just some nice pictures showcasing some of the things that we've been doing. So we've been at the farmers markets, having outreach booths and educating the public about the project and litter, stormwater in general, the kinds of things that we're finding. Some people are certainly amazed by the percentage of litter that is cigarette butts. Other people are surprised that stormwater doesn't typically get treated and just empties out into the creek or lake, what have you, without any treatment. Um, we've been at numerous other community events like New Sudbury Days at Twin Forks, Valet's Garson Mine Family Day. We also provide brochures and have posters at like the libraries, and we're planning to uh, have some more advertisements, I guess, about the catch basins in the stormwater program at our various partner properties with their permission, of course. And another little project we do that helps to reach both students that we work with and the broader community is something called Yellowfish Road. So the picture in the top right there, the student painting a yellowfish with this label rain only. Um, that's to remind both students and people in their neighborhoods along public streets, low traffic streets in various subdivisions throughout the city. Um, to remind people that the storm drains empty into our local waterways, Junction Creek or other lakes, what have you, and that we only want rainwater to go down the drains. So no soaps or detergents, oil, pet waste, garbage. So that's one way that we reach more students and try to make an impression on the students at an earlier age. All right. I'd say I'm done with that.
Great. Well, thank you, Devin. I'll continue, and I apologize in advance if you could hear my dog barking in the background. Apparently, there's something of interest outside. So now that you've learned a bit more about the stormwater and the pollutants, its connection to local waterways and our project, we'd also like to share some information about ways to reduce stormwater pollution and to help take care of the land and water. So looking at ways to reduce stormwater pollutants themselves, we have an image here that shows some of the top six pollutants that stormwaters bring into local waterways. This includes litter, household waste, waste from vehicles. So this could be like oil or gas leaks. Also pesticides, herbicides that are put on lawns or in gardens, yard waste like lawn clippings, pet waste as well. These are the top six. So thinking about ways to reduce that, those pollutants from going to local waterways through the stormwater, reducing your use of these items of pesticides and herbicides and using eco-friendly products instead. Making sure to pick up after your pets. And this also includes areas like along the trails that are adjacent to Junction Creek as well, because runoff from stormwater isn't necessarily just going into the waterways from these pipes, but also runoff on the landscape as well. Reducing the amount of waste you create is a good way of reducing litter, and picking up litter when you can in a safe manner, and the vehicle maintenance, making sure that there's no leaks or drips that are running off from your driveway into the stormwater. Never pour anything directly into the storm drains. And actually washing your car at a car wash is a way of preventing those soaps from washing your car if we're going into the stormwater. Looking at ways to reduce the amount of runoff. So you could use ways of collecting that runoff, such as rain barrels under your rain spouts, and then you could use that for your gardens. And as we were talking about before with the impervious surfaces, reducing the amount of hard surfaces and increasing green infrastructure. So green infrastructure are the plants. We're talking about the wildflowers, the trees, the shrubs, and these are ways that will help to absorb that water and use that water to reduce the amount of stormwater runoff. In the next slide here, I have that shows some of these different green infrastructures and how they work in the community to reduce the quantity of stormwater runoff. So we're looking at those green spaces. A lot of these types of green infrastructures are projects that the Stewardship Committee helps to provide in the community and part of the restoration of the riparian habitat, that green space along Junction Creek. So that's why it's really important for planting those native trees, shrubs, and wildflowers. And you've probably heard more about projects such as rain gardens and some other low impact development that's been going on in Sudbury. And the Stewardship Committee is going to have a social media campaign this month that's focused on low impact development and these green infrastructures. So if you're interested in learning more, stay tuned on our social media networks. And other ways to help make a difference. So what you do, no matter what you do, it does make a difference, and you get to decide what kind of a difference you're going to make. And that's a quote from Jane Goodall. So whether you're going to make a positive or a negative impact on the watershed, it's all up to the actions that you take. So there's various opportunities that you could get involved. Already being members and attending, watching this presentation is a great start, helping to raise that awareness and talking to friends and family as well. Volunteering, I know that a lot of you have already been part of that, and thank you so much. It goes a long way having so many hands help out, and helping to connect with nature, building that relationship or rebuilding that relationship to have that appreciation for the natural, the landscape and the water and the critters that call the Junction Creek watershed home. Community science, that's a fun way of getting to know the different plants and wildlife in your area and reporting. There's programs such as iNaturalist, which are a great way to help learn and fill in these knowledge gaps about the local wildlife. And of course, donating to support our programs, that's something that's huge, and every little bit of money goes a long way to help to ensure that we can continue these to offer these programs and community stewardship activities, and to have the staff to facilitate and make sure that it's something that continues in the future. And that comes to the end of our presentation. There's a little shout out, a thank you to everyone who's been involved in the project, project partners, funders, property owners, and volunteers. There's a lot, we can't list them all, but these are some of the main ones there. And of course, our funder, the Environment and Climate Change Canada, through their Eco Action project. That's what has funded this stormwater project. And I also wanted to mention that we have a survey. If you could fill that out, Devin's gonna share a link in the chat if he hasn't already. Good, awesome. And it's just a quick little survey, and this helps us with our funding reports to show that what kind of changes our educational components of the project are providing to the community.